Chapter 28. I'm what? What you need to know about the past is that no matter what has happened, it has all worked together to bring you to this very moment. And this is the moment you can choose to make everything new, right now. Author unknown. There would be little sleep in the long evening that followed the reunion. There was far too much to catch up on, far too much to share and learn about each other. Tears, anger, sadness, and the stories. They tripped over each other's words, eager to describe the lives they had lived since that fateful stormy night so long ago. Jess mourned once again her friend Erin as she recounted the few months of freedom they both had before losing her so tragically in that abandoned farmhouse outside of Clinton. The others, Becca, Erin, and David, along with Carrie and Todd, circled about in the background as Jess and Chris laughed, cried, and hugged and described the past dozen years. It would be hours later that a meal was set before them, eaten and barely tasted, as Chris described old Fenton and his cleaning the shotgun, or Jess spoke of Serena and adopting Becca as her own. She did not elaborate more on Jacob's beginnings, other than to describe his birth and the ruins of Clinton, tussling his hair and pleading silently with her eyes for Chris to not ask more details. The boy stared at Chris silently, his face and hair so reminiscent of the nightmare they both had endured. It wasn't anything the boy said or did, just the way that he looked so exactly like that monster, except for Jess's crayon blue eyes. Chris swallowed the revulsion he felt with difficulty, tried to remind himself that where the boy had come from was not who the boy was. We are defined by the responses we make to the circumstances that surround us, not the circumstances themselves. Although his mind reasoned this, his stomach churned at the thought of what his sister had gone through, all alone. In the days that followed, the plan to move on to Denver was delayed indefinitely. It was high summer, and there was plenty of farm work to be done. Chris stepped up when Jess came down with a strange intermittent flu. It would hit her especially hard in the morning, so Chris took over milking the goats, two of which were vicious beasts well known to bite when one least expected it. Carrie found herself painting murals in the old downtown where they now had a small school set up, and lunching with Sarah regularly at the cafe. Chris had made a special visit on his own, to visit with old Mr. Banks. He'd explained what he knew of Alan's death, filling in the details that no one else had known. The old man's grandson had died a hero, protecting the information of which direction the girls had fled that stormy night a dozen years past. His silence had cost him his life, and given Jess and her friend Erin the small window of time they desperately needed to escape. The old man had listened, nodding as Chris told him what he knew, a small tear trickling down his weathered cheek. A week later, he had turned over the farm to David and Jess, and headed into town to register as a challenger to Mayor Farley in the upcoming election. It was an odd move for the old man, who had been happy to keep to his homestead on the outskirts of the town for years. And so it was, several weeks after arriving in Belton, that Carrie had suddenly found herself between painting jobs. She walked over to the house, looking for Chris, and found Jess instead, looking miserable and ill. "I just don't understand it, this horrible flu," Jess said, her face pale with dark circles under her eyes. "Just when I think I'm over it, it comes back." The two women were less than a year apart in age, and Jess had been disappointed when she came down with the flu and wasn't able to spend more time with her new sister-in-law. She wanted to ask Carrie so many things, personal things. She suspected that her brother's wife couldn't have children. At first, she had just assumed it was by choice. Then she had seen Carrie interact with little Aaron, joke and laugh with Becca and Jacob, and kindly volunteer to paint a mural for the new school, which had been reestablished just 2 years ago in the remains of an old hardware store on Main Street. The school was only open in late fall through early spring, half-days, allowing for children who lived in the surrounding countryside to attend around their families' farming schedules. The school had dismissed for the summer before Chris and Carrie had arrived, but the building was now being retrofitted with a small kitchen and other improvements. The mural that Carrie had painted was the crowning jewel to that. Carrie leaned close to Jess and gave her a hug. She missed Liza and Carl and the kids. She hadn't realized how badly she missed them until she stopped long enough from painting to interact with her sister-in-law. What a miracle it was for Chris to find Jess alive here, and after so many years. She smiled at Jess, who looked beautiful even when she was sick, and then, as a click of recognition slammed into her brain, she gasped and covered her mouth. "What is it?" Jess looked confused. "How long have you been sick with the flu, Jess?" "I don't know," Jess shrugged. "Maybe a week or 2? As she said it out loud, a conversation from the past exploded into memory. "How long have you been sick, Jess?" Erin's voice was clear of any sleepiness now, and she sounded frightened. "About... Jess listed back toward the stream and heaved again. "Oh man, this sucks. Going on..." She bent and retched. "About 3 weeks now. Why?" "When was your last period?" Erin persisted. Jess looked at her oddly. "I don't know, a month, maybe 2. "When exactly? How the hell should I know?" "Well, do you think it's possible that..." Jess stared at Carrie with wide eyes. "Oh my God. Oh my God, And without saying another word, she turned and retched into a nearby trash can. Carrie had smiled and brewed some raspberry tea for Jess, searched out some dry, stale biscuits from a couple of days ago, and hugged her sister-in-law and congratulated her. Then she had locked her own pain down and given Jess some space to herself to think about the life growing inside her and form the words that she would say to David and the rest of the family. It was mid-afternoon by the time she made her escape, and Carrie aimlessly walked back into town and into Sarah's cafe. Sarah had been well occupied with Wes and her children and grandchildren during the past few weeks. Carrie had sensed a very kind soul in her, but had not had a chance to speak with her much. The lunch rush was long gone, and the cafe didn't serve dinner. Sarah had almost finished cleaning up, and Wes had gone with Chris and David on a trip into the city to trade for supplies. When Carrie appeared at the door, Sarah opened it and insisted she come in. A few pleasantries aside, Sarah stared at Carrie sharply and said, "You have something weighing on you terribly, girl. What is it?" That simple question had broken the dam. Carrie burst into tears. It took several long minutes before she was able to explain. She spilled about Jess being pregnant, and sobbed again as she described the miscarriages and stillbirths. "We have lost so many babies, Sarah. It has been so hard, so painful. I guess..." She stopped and brushed her tears away. So many times over the years I have wondered why Chris even stuck with me." The older woman nodded, placing a warm hand on Carrie's. "I see how much he loves you. He'd have to, every time. I get so sad, so angry." She shook her head. "I push him away." Sarah laughed softly. "Oh, Carrie, that man loves you far too much to be deterred by a little push away now and then. I'd imagined that it might actually prove an irresistible challenge. She squeezed the younger woman's hand. She stroked Carrie's hair. It's okay to cry, to be sad, and to want what you want. The older woman was so kind, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, Carrie simply gave in to the years of disappointment and loss and sobbed in Sarah's arms. She cried until she couldn't cry anymore. Sarah just held her, stroked her hair, and rocked her. Carrie couldn't help thinking of her mother, and the hole her absence had created in their lives, even more so than their father's. She had been the eldest, and she had had to be strong for Liza and for their baby brother for all of those years. Learning to hide her pain from her parents' loss had provided an easy segue into hiding her pain during the stillbirths and miscarriages. After Carrie had cried herself out, Sarah had given her a cup of tea and led her to the back rooms to a comfortable couch to lie down on. Sarah hugged her again. There now. You are safe here. Get some rest, my dear. You've just let out a flood of sadness, and there's nothing like a little nap to set you right after that. She closed the door quietly, leaving the younger woman in the room alone. Carrie had tried to fight it at first, telling herself she should return to the house and help get dinner started or work out in the yard, but every part of her felt hulled out by the storm of emotions. Her eyelids slowly became heavier. She closed them, thought of the look of terror and joy on Jess's face, and smiled sadly at the thought of her husband's sister, in love and expecting a child. The world spun around these children, born into a different time than she or her parents had been born. It spun around and around. Babies were born, people died, and still the world kept spinning. She slipped into a deep sleep on the soft couch, barely aware of the bustle in the kitchen and restaurant outside of the door.